Hey everyone, I recently learned a new keyboard layout, and I invested so much time and energy in the process that it got me thinking. We talk about the learning curve, which is how difficult it is to learn something, but we don't talk about how the learning curve feels. I want to break down how I felt as I learned this new keyboard layout. So first, let's talk about the what and why. The what is very simple. On top is a QWERTY keyboard layout, and on bottom is Colmac DH, which I'll just call Colmac for the rest of this video. And what I did is I switched from this layout to this layout on bottom. As for why, if you go to colmac.com under advantages, it lists some of the reasons. The one I was most interested in is the first one, which is ergonomics and comfort. I was worried that down the line, given the amount of typing I do, I might start experiencing some pain. So that's it. That's the what and why. But this video is supposed to be about feelings. So let me give you some context. Like many of you, I had been using QWERTY for my entire life. I typed on it, I gamed on it, I programmed on it. My phone even uses a QWERTY layout. When you use something for that long and in that many scenarios, you really embed it into your muscle memory. So now imagine that you're faced with this as you try to be as productive as you once were. I'd always wanted to learn Colmac, so I was more excited than daunted at the beginning. I had my eyes glued to a picture like this one when I started out so that I knew where the keys were as I typed out the first words. But I knew I couldn't stick with that, so I eventually moved to a training program and then typing tests. I tracked almost every single typing test I took for about 4 months, and I made that publicly available here in this spreadsheet. If we just look at the first 7 days, we see that I improved by more than 10% each one of those days. I felt really great about that. But then this fourth column shows notes, and I highlighted some of these here. Terrible accuracy, lowest yet. PB, which just stands for personal best. It's whenever I set a record. What a terrible test that was. It just progressively got worse. Another PB. A trend is emerging here, and it's whether positive or negative, I was focusing too much on metrics. Remember, my goal was to learn the new layout. I should not have been focusing this much on scores because it led to some bad things. For one, I would get dejected if I didn't see my scores rising over the course of a week. The second is that I felt anxiety over starting new tests if I already had a pretty good average for the day, so I would just stop my sessions early. Likewise, I would end individual tests early if I started making too many mistakes. Those sorts of things, ending tests or ending sessions early, skew the metrics more positive to a reality that doesn't really exist. In the end, I had a competition with myself that I was prioritizing over learning. Don't get me wrong, even after all of this, I still don't think metrics are the problem. It's just that I was fixating on them. There are many upsides to metrics. For example, you can tell that you're actually making progress. You can gauge if your goals are hit, which for me meant, was I at roughly the same speed and accuracy I was at with QWERTY? Then I could know, okay, this was a success or this was a failure and maybe I should try something different. It allows you to experiment. Maybe I could have tested shorter training sessions or maybe testing it morning versus in the evening. If I didn't have metrics, I wouldn't be able to compare whether those different methodologies were working. And finally, comparing with others, if I were to tell you, hey, it took me about 3 months to get comfortable with it, does that mean it took 2.5 months to get mostly comfortable and then just a little bit of improvement? Or was it mostly improvement at the beginning? How did that curve look? I can share those milestones with other people. So in the end, I think metrics are worth it. But if you're going to take them, then you need to make sure, one, that they're relevant. So for me, I was tracking speed and accuracy. I think pretty relevant when it comes to typing tests. Two, that you're not fixating on them. So you shouldn't just be focused on, is my speed improving? You should also make sure that you're having fun learning. And three, that your methodology makes sense. And this is where I made a crucial flaw. For the first 2 months or so, I was using a test like this, which had the top 200 English words, all lowercase, no punctuation. The problem is that's not representative of how I type. I tried correcting it for a little while using the top 5,000 English words with capitalization and punctuation, but then you end up with sentences like shoe, stupid, coffee, passionate, which is an ordering of words that most people will never type in their lives. What I found that worked pretty well, and this is what I settled on for a while, was just typing quotes, where at least something like the word want will be followed by the word to, like it does in most English sentences. This meant that the habits I was building while testing would be germane to my actual typing. As for why my testing methodology was bad, it is not a satisfying reason. It's because when I was testing QWERTY, this is the only comparison point that I had, which was the top 200 English words, all lowercase, no punctuation. So you might be wondering, well, once you realized it was a bad test, why didn't you just try quotes with QWERTY? And again, it is not a satisfying reason, which is that I had sort of lost my QWERTY muscle memory. So I knew that they would be bad tests and that I would be comparing my slightly better Colmac metrics against my slightly worse QWERTY metrics. All of that is to say that I stuck with bad testing for far too long. But I said I wanted this video to be about how the learning curve feels. So what does bad testing have to do with it? It's simple. It broke my gauge. At some point, it looked like I was testing at above 100 words per minute. But then I would go to type an email and it took a lot longer than it should have if I were really typing above 100 words per minute. If I had more accurately tested my typing speed, then I wouldn't have had this divide between expectation and reality. And those expectations play a critical role. When someone messages you, "How was your weekend?" you have an idea of how long it'll take you to respond. If I thought it would take 15 seconds, but it ended up taking 2 minutes, I would start questioning everything about the learning process. And it's those questions, those very unpleasant questions that went through my head that prompted making this video. These are things I actually wrote in a little learning journal that I was keeping as I was going through this process. Would I have learned this slowly 10 years ago? Will I learn even slower 10 years from now? What if I'm not practicing enough? How many more days or weeks will it take before this feels comfortable? And what if I spent all this time switching and this is as good as it gets? It made me realize that learning involves vulnerability. It's putting yourself in a position of feeling like you lack mastery because you do lack mastery. It's that thought of confronting my limits that was so challenging for me to just accept. I can only cram so much information into my brain or my muscle memory, and I can only do it fast enough. And this isn't a new concept. The US government produced estimates for how long it takes the average person who speaks English to learn a different language. And this is based on 25 class hours per week. If you go from English to Dutch, it takes you about 24 weeks. But if you're trying to learn Arabic, it takes nearly 4 times as long. So now imagine that you're trying to learn Dutch, and instead of taking 24 weeks, it takes you 30 weeks. It could be really easy to feel disappointed. But I think what it's important to focus on is how far you've come since 10 weeks, since 20 weeks, or even since the very beginning. Almost every time I've hit a plateau in something I've been learning, it's always because I've needed more time or practice doing it. Occasionally, it's that I needed some piece of knowledge or a technique that would unblock me. But even after that, it would just be more time and practice. In the future, I want to look at my own learning process that way, as this simple equation: learning is time plus practice. Because then I feel like you can put in that time and practice and feel good and not focus on metrics so much. All right, time to sum up. And some of these conclusions don't come from other points that were in the video, but I wanted to include them somewhere, and they're pretty straightforward. One is that there is a such thing as bad practice. And you saw this with when I was typing the top 200 English words and how it wasn't representative of how I actually type. That meant that I was practicing towards something that wasn't helping me achieve my goal. Relatedly, fixating on metrics will lead to heartache. We use metrics as a gauge for whether we've learned something, but if we fixate on them, then we're only going to try to boost those metrics and not actually further our learning. Third is that there are no shortcuts. Learning equals time plus practice. It's not like I could have just looked at a picture of the Colmac layout for 100 days straight and then started being a master typist afterward. I needed to put in the time, I needed to make mistakes so that I could learn and grow from them. Fourth, and this was not in the rest of the video, but I think sleep is probably just as important as good practice and putting in the time learning. It's when we form connections in our head and when we kind of store the memories of what we've learned. I love this quote: "If you can't do it slowly, then you won't do it quickly." I learned this when I was practicing piano a long time ago, but it's the same with typing. If you're typing at 30 words per minute, it's not, "Oh, I'll just push myself a little harder for this next test and type at 130 words per minute." That's just not feasible. You have to follow that learning curve of going up by a certain amount or percentage every day or week. Finally, the most important conclusion: learning should be fun. And if it's not fun, then we should try to make it fun. I hope this video was fun for you and that you enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much.